Welcome back to Combat Mission Black Sea, where we're going to take a look at the Russian MTLB. A little history, its in-game technical characteristics, its variants, and how to get the most out of it in Combat Mission. It's an old design, and tens of thousands of them were made, so they also pop up in Combat Mission Cold War and Combat Mission Shock Force with the Soviet and Syrian armies respectively. A lot of what we're going to cover here obviously also applies to those games. MTLB is a Russian acronym that translates to Light Armoured Multipurpose Tractor. It was originally designed as an artillery prime mover. Its job was to tow artillery pieces around whilst also carrying the crew, ammunition and all the other bits and pieces that artillery needs to function effectively. Accepted into service in 1964 to replace older prime movers, the MTLB represented a step from post-World War II designs to get in line with Soviet Cold War thinking and the need to operate in a variety of different terrain types, cross water obstacles, and function effectively in a nuclear or chemical environment. As such, the MTLB was fully enclosed, armoured, provided with MBC protection systems, and capable of traversing difficult boggy or swampy terrain as well as rivers. It was a useful vehicle that saw some variants developed over the Cold War. Once any military finds an acceptable chassis, it immediately starts bolting everything it can to it to see if it will work, spawning anti-tank, anti-air and command vehicle variants. Although the MTLB remained primarily a tractor transporter vehicle, it has seen service as the standard armoured personnel carrier of some motor rifle units intended to operate in difficult terrain, such as the Arctic, replacing BTRs or BMPs, which has led to MTLB variants with upgraded armaments to fit into that IFV role. The design is still going strong, it's seeing service on both sides in the war in Ukraine, and continues to serve as a platform for various Frankenstein projects. Fundamentally, it's a box on tracks, and that is something that will always be useful. In Combat Mission Black Sea, the basic model is the MTLB-M. From a standing start, it can manage about 660 metres in a turn on a dirt track and about 500 metres on grass. There's nothing particular about its movement characteristics that are out of line with the general expectations for a tracked vehicle. It's got a pretty tight turning circle, and if necessary it can pivot in place on its tracks. Of particular note though, the long wide tracks lend themselves to a low ground pressure. This is difficult to quantify in combat mission, but elements like ground pressure are modelled, so MTLBs shouldn't get stuck in the mud too much. It is also amphibious, using its tracks for propulsion. Obviously travel through water is much slower and damage more fatal, so if you have to cross any water obstacles, try and make sure no one can see you. In terms of protection, the MTLB is proof against small arms fire and artillery fragments. It's capable of resisting 50 caliber machine gun fire in its frontal arc, but that's about it. Your average US infantry squad will tear holes in it with 40mm HEDP grenades, and 7.62mm machine guns can and will penetrate the side armour. This is quite similar to the BTR and BMP families, though the MTLB bucks the post-penetration trend here by not being full of ammunition. As such, while it can be penetrated by almost anything, and make no mistake here, that is bad and you should avoid it, it is much less likely to explode or set on fire than other Soviet and post-Soviet vehicles. Also somewhat noteworthy is that there are no extra defensive systems in place. The basic MTLB-M in Black Sea doesn't have any smoke launchers, it doesn't have an explosive reactive armour package, it doesn't have any fancy jammers or dazzlers or anything like that. The only protection it's got is its thin armoured shell. The MTLB is armed with a PKT machine gun in a tiny remote control turret mounted on the front starboard side. There's not much to say about this. It's a machine gun that can fire out to an in-game range of 1500 metres, with all the usual caveats about the difficulties of spotting targets at that range, and the unlikeliness of them being polite enough to hang around in the beaten zone waiting to get hit. It carries over 2,000 rounds of 7.62x54R for it, but it is fundamentally a self-defense weapon. The PKT is operated by a gunner commander, sat directly underneath it. Sat next to him is the driver. They both enter and exit via hatches in the cab roof. Both of the crew have a variety of other prisms and viewing slits around the front of the vehicle, but the large frontal viewports are fixed shut in Black Sea. The crew can't open them, they have to rely on the other optics, and the less you expect from them in terms of spotting, the less disappointed you're going to be. Behind the crew compartment is the engine, and behind that is the passenger or cargo compartment with space for 10 dismounts. These sit along the sides of the vehicle facing inwards and get in and out via the rear doors. The original MTLB design did feature 4 firing ports, 1 on each side and 1 in each rear door. These don't appear to be working in Black Sea. The passengers can still engage from the vehicle, but they do so by popping the top hatches and firing from there. Important to note is that only the passengers will open up when given the command. The crew will stay buttoned no matter what. Also important to note is that the MTLB has a larger passenger capacity than BTRs and BMPs. With Russian squads modelled in Black Sea at 6 or 7 soldiers, this gives you 3 or 4 free seats to add in other elements. The passengers share the rear compartment with some ammunition: 5 PG-7VL heat rounds for the RPG-7, 4 RPG-26 one-shot disposable AT weapons, 1,000 rounds of 7.62x54R for PK machine guns, and 2,000 rounds of 5.45mm for all the other infantry small arms. Finally, as you might expect in hypothetical 2017, the MTLB is fitted with a radio. That's the basic MTLB-M then, on to the variants. The first of these make efforts to upgrade the armament and shift the MTLB towards more of an IFV role. The MTLB-M 6MA and 6MB both remove the PKT turret at the front and add a BTR turret at the back. The 6MA features the older BTR-80 turret, equipped with a 14.5mm KP-VT heavy machine gun and a coax PKT. The KB-VT can reach out to 2,000 meters, but only has 500 rounds of ammunition, so as usual, it's better engaging things that are a little bit closer. The 6MB has the newer BTR-80A BPPU turret, which is armed with the 27A72 30mm cannon. This has a dual feed with 150 rounds each of high explosive incendiary and armor piercing discarding sabot. Again, that's not a lot of ammunition, and the turret also mounts the ubiquitous PKT coax. Both these new weapons represent a step up in effectiveness for the MTLB against light vehicles. The cannon can certainly do considerable damage, even to US tanks if it gets the opportunity and the right angles, but the low level ammo for both means that prolonged engagements are going to present some problems. Potentially more useful than the armament, both turrets are also equipped with smoke launchers. These will create a thermal blocking smoke screen 130 meters out in front of the turret, giving the MTLB a bit of space to maneuver. In short then, the 6MA and 6MB variants are efforts to bring the MTLB into line with BTRs, allowing them to better support their dismounts and fit better into Soviet and Russian doctrine. Next up, we have the 9P149 STyr S, which is an ATGM-equipped tank destroyer. Again, this deletes the PKT turret and mounts a new weapon at the rear, an AT-6 anti-tank guided missile launcher. This can engage targets out to 7,000 meters using 9M114 missiles with wireless radio SACLOS guidance aimed from a control station at the gunner commander's position. This isn't going to penetrate something like an Abrams from the front, at least not the M1A2 modelled in Black Sea, but it is capable of inflicting some significant subsystem damage and can easily destroy less well-armoured targets like Bradleys. It is best used in a pop-up role though. The STyr S is vulnerable enough, having to stay in position guiding the missiles, but it can only have one ready to launch at a time, and it takes 40 seconds to reload, so make sure you shoot and scoot. There's still a 2-man crew. The actual reloading is carried out by an autoloader in the rear compartment. The STyr S carries 12 missiles in total. As well as an anti-tank variant, we have an anti-air variant, the 9K35 Strela 10M3. Unhelpfully, it seems like there are loads of Soviet and Russian SAM systems called Strela, so we're going to refer to this one by its NATO reporting name, the SA13 Gopher. This variant removes the PKT turret and sticks a SAM launcher on the back. This requires an extra crew member who sits behind a screen at the base of the launcher. The whole thing collapses down for reloading. The launcher can carry 4 missiles ready to fire, with another 8 inside the hull for a total of 12. Gauging anti-air effectiveness in combat mission is always tricky, but the Gopher is certainly capable of disrupting and shooting down enemy air assets, including the larger types of UAV. The issue in a combat mission sense is that it's a one-trick pony. It's a dedicated anti-air vehicle that can't engage ground targets, so they tend to feature more as objectives or barriers to air support in scenarios, while the more flexible Tunguska gets the limelight. The next variant is the SA24 Medium mortar carrier. In a shock development, this one retains the tiny PKT turret and simply adds a platform in the cargo compartment for an 82mm mortar. This has a 3-man crew who stand on a platform with it, presumably hoping that nobody shoots at them. I'm not sure why the mortar is up so high. In other mortar carrier designs, the base plate is pretty much on the floor of the vehicle and the crew can operate undercover, so answers on a postcard for that one. The mortar has a minimum range of 100 meters and carries a total of 75 high explosive and 8 smoke bombs. Finally, we have the MTLB 1V14, which is an artillery observation vehicle. This uses the larger MTLB chassis, which is both longer, there's an extra road wheel crammed in there, and taller. As you might expect, this variant has more radios and features some observation equipment, though it doesn't appear to decrease call-in times for forward observers hitching a ride. The crew of the vehicle itself can call for fire though, so it's not just a slightly bigger transport. Obviously the vehicle is visually different, but these are minor practical differences in combat mission terms. There is a single door at the rear for the passengers, the PKT has been moved from its tiny forward turret to a pintle mount on a slightly larger turret in the centre of the hull, there is an extra crewman, and it can only carry 9 instead of 10 passengers. The downside, of course, is that this thing is easily recognisable and thus an obvious high-value target to opposing players. So, those are all the variants out of the way. How do you get the most out of the MTLB in combat mission? Somewhat uniquely, this is a vehicle where the base model is almost less commonly seen than the variants. Playing as the Russians in Black Sea, the basic tractor transporter APC variant of the MTLB crops up surprisingly rarely, while the more specialised variants hold their own little niches as anti-tank, anti-air and forward observer vehicles. Obviously these need to be operated according to their roles. None of the MTLBs react well to getting shot at, so keeping them at arm's length and behind cover is a must. Mobile SAMs, mortar carriers and FO vehicles, sitting behind a hill for an entire game, are doing exactly what they need to do. STyr S tank destroyers are best fighting pop-up shoot and scoot ambushes at long range. The 6MA and 6MB variants slot pretty well into the same role as the BTR. They're battle taxis for the infantry with escalating but limited capacity for supporting fire. Certainly, IFVs and APCs in Ukraine have been used to deliver infantry to their objectives, which is very much a role the MTLB can carry out, but a lot of other factors have to come together for this to work without prohibitive losses, at which point the actual characteristics of the battle taxi you're using become less important. In other words, the MTLB is something of a workhorse. Its actual intended role, that of an artillery prime mover, doesn't particularly feature in combat mission. It's present in that capacity in older organisation anti-tank formations where it tows anti-tank guns, but especially by Black Sea, it's mostly seen having expanded into the roles of other vehicles. As such, it's generally not quite as effective as specifically designed vehicles, but may be a better choice in certain environments. Hope you all found this one interesting, and I'll catch you in the next video.